In the ancient land of Kosala, long before temples towered and scrolls were inked with gold, there lived a restless young man named Sāriya. Born to a family of scribes near the banks of the Āsravati River, Sāriya grew up amidst chants, rituals, and parables. He knew the hymns of the Vedas, the stories of gods who flew on chariots of fire, and the teachings that promised rebirth in celestial worlds. But the more he studied, the more uneasy he became. They speak of eternal heavens. He once told his mother, but no one who has gone there ever returns. How do we know we're not just chasing shadows? His family, troubled by his doubt, sent him to the forest retreats to study with sages and hermits. He sat under banyan trees beside old rishis who claimed to have glimpsed the formless Brahman. He fasted until his ribs were like ropes, meditated until sweat pooled at his knees, chanted mantras until his voice cracked. Yet, within him, something still smoldered. If truth is real, should it not be seen directly? Not promised in another life, but touched here and now? That question haunted him like a bird that circled but never landed. Years passed, and Sāriya became a wanderer. His robes were tattered, but his eyes burned with a quiet fire. He walked from Magadha to Videha, from the salt plains to the snow-fed forests. He listened to the Ajivikas, who believed in fate, the Jains, who sought release through self-punishment, and the Brahmins, who promised access to heaven through precise sacrifice. But the answers were all the same, always elsewhere, always later, always after death. Until one day, in the outskirts of Jetavana Grove, Sāriya came upon a curious scene, an old monk, sitting beneath a Bodhi tree, watching an ant carry a seed across a root. His face was calm, not serene in the way of statues, but alive with awareness. His attention rested fully on the present, as though nothing in the world were missing. Sāriya stood there for a long time before approaching. "Venerable sir," he said, bowing low, "I have heard of your teacher, the Buddha. They say he speaks of something called Nibbana. Some call it the supreme heaven. Others say it is extinction. I ask you plainly, what is Nibbana?" The old monk turned slowly, and his eyes, clear and unclouded, met Sāriya's. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he raised a hand and pointed to the ant. "Do you see it struggle?" he asked. "Yes." "And do you see its pause when the seed is too heavy?" "Yes." That moment, when it drops the burden and simply breathes, that is closer to Nibbana than all the heavens spoken of by poets. Sāriya was silent. "Nibbana," the monk said gently, "is not a place, not a paradise, not a reward. It is the ending of struggle, the quenching of the fire, the absence of hunger. It is not where one goes. It is where craving ceases." These words, so simple and so unlike the chants of priests, struck something within Sāriya. He bowed again, not out of reverence, but out of recognition. "Then let me learn this ending," he whispered. "Then stop searching outside," the monk replied. "Sit, watch, see the fire in yourself. When you cease to feed it, it will cease to burn." And so Sāriya stayed, under the shade of that tree, beginning not a path to heaven, but a journey inward, toward a flame he no longer needed to fear. The old monk had given Sāriya a new kind of seed, not one to plant in soil, but one to plant in silence. Yet the fire of inquiry still smoldered within him, and so he wandered further, testing the teachings of other spiritual masters with sharpened discernment. He arrived in Vaisali, a city of great wealth and greater pride. There, amidst flower-lined streets and golden rooftops, he met a man known as Vaga the priest merchant, a Brahmin with silk robes, honeyed speech, and a temple built from ivory and faith. Vaga's fame spread not from wisdom, but from a peculiar business. He sold afterlives. "If you donate a gold coin," he told pilgrims, "your soul shall rise to the moon realm. For 10 coins, Brahmaloka awaits. For 100, liberation beyond rebirth." Sāriya watched this with quiet skepticism. When the crowd dispersed, he approached the merchant and bowed respectfully. "Sir," Sāriya said, "you speak of a place called liberation. Is this what the Buddha calls Nibbana?" Vaga adjusted his jeweled necklace and smiled with practiced kindness. "Nibbana," he said. Yes, it is the supreme realm beyond all suffering. But make no mistake, young seeker, it is still a realm, a place of eternal light, where the purified soul resides forever in joy." Sāriya frowned slightly. "Then it must be made of something. And if made, must it not be impermanent?" Vaga's expression soured for a breath but quickly sweetened again. You are clever, he said. But truth lies beyond logic. The gods do not question. Neither should we. Have faith. Sāriya nodded politely, but inside, a storm gathered. And who enjoys this eternal joy, he asked. If the soul merges into bliss, what remains to know it? If joy is felt, does that not imply a mind? And if there is a mind, is it not still changing? Vaga bristled now. Young man, he said sharply, you think too much. These matters are beyond ordinary thought. Trust the scriptures. Trust the rituals. Liberation is a destination. You just need the right fare. Sāriya left the temple with heavy steps. That night, under the open sky, he stared at the stars and whispered into the silence. If heaven is sold with coins and prayers, is it still sacred? If Nibbana can be bought, is it not just another possession? In the stillness, his doubts deepened into insight. He remembered the monk under the Bodhi tree and how his peace had not been explained, but embodied. Not a promise for the future, but a presence in the now. He sat that night under a tamarind tree, silent and still, letting the thoughts pass like birds over water. He saw how the merchant priest sold dreams, but dreams were still fabrications. Constructed, dependent, and what is constructed can collapse. How can the end of suffering be something built? He asked himself. If it is made, it can break. If it is gained, it can be lost. Then how can it be final? This paradox refused to loosen its grip. And then, like dawn spilling slowly over the horizon, the contradiction revealed its lesson. Perhaps Nibbana is not something to gain at all, but something to stop clinging to. That idea struck him like a bell rung in the heart. He felt a stillness rise within him, not silence from suppression, but from a lack of need. He understood then why the merchant could not speak clearly of Nibbana. He spoke in terms of getting, but Nibbana was about ending. Not arrival, Sāriya whispered, but cessation. Not possession, but freedom from the thirst to possess. The next morning, he returned to the merchant's temple, not to argue, but to offer thanks. You taught me something important, he said to Vaga, who looked at him suspiciously. Oh, and what is that? That truth cannot be sold. And what cannot be sold cannot be lost. With that, Sāriya turned, leaving behind the perfumed air and gold-plated altars, walking barefoot into the uncertain, unpaved world, not to find Nibbana, but to understand why it had been misunderstood. Sāriya's feet, blistered and caked with dust, carried him toward Savatthi, the city of merchants and monks. It was said that within the quiet groves of Jetavana, the Buddha often taught, not in riddles or threats, but in words that pierced like arrows and soothed like rain. He entered the monastery silently, not asking for teachings, but listening from the edge of the assembly. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through rustling sal trees, an elder monk began to chant from memory. Athai, Bhikkhave, Ajta Abda Akata Asakata. There is, monks, the unborn, the unbecome, the unmade, the unconditioned. Udana 8.3. The words sent a shiver down Sāriya's spine, not because they were mysterious, but because they did not describe a place or a being, or a reward, but a principle that seemed to exist outside the rules of becoming. After the recitation, Sāriya approached the elder, who was brushing fallen leaves into a small pile. Venerable sir, he said, those words you recited, are they speaking of Nibbana? The elder smiled without turning. What do you understand from them? They say there is something beyond birth and becoming. Something not made, not formed, not compounded. That cannot be a place. It cannot be a realm like Brahmaloka. So, what is it? The monk turned to face him. His eyes were tired but kind. You are right. It is not a place. It is not even a thing. It is the absence of fabrication. You see, all things that are made arise from causes. They are born, and so they die. They burn, and so they leave ash. But what is unconditioned has no cause, no birth. It does not arise, and it does not fall. Sāriya was silent for a long time. Then how does one reach it? The elder monk shook his head. You cannot reach what does not come. You can only stop moving toward what is fabricated. Then Nibbana is not about becoming anything, not even better? No. The elder said, it is about ending the compulsion to become. This shattered Sāriya's old vision. His entire life had been spent becoming a better seeker, a purer soul, a wiser man. He had thought liberation would be the final, perfect becoming. But here, the Buddha's words pointed to something radical, not perfection through accumulation, but freedom through cessation. The elder monk walked with him to a small stream. As the water rippled over pebbles, the monk pointed and asked, "What do you see?" "Water flowing," Sāriya said. "And what makes it flow?" "The slope, the terrain." "And what if the slope ends? If the earth flattens? Then it will stop flowing." "So it is with the mind," said the monk. "It flows toward becoming, toward sights and sounds and forms, toward identity, toward birth. But if you see the slope, the craving, the clinging, and you let go of it, the flow stops. And that stopping is Nibbāna? Yes. Not the water, not the flow, but the stopping. It is not annihilation. It is not arrival. It is cessation of the tendency to burn." That night, Sāriya lay awake, replaying the words, Ajda, Abda, Akata, Asakata, the unborn, the unbecome, the unmade, the unconditioned. He had always imagined that enlightenment meant rising, becoming purer, higher, more divine. But the Buddha's teaching pointed downward, into the roots of suffering, into the very machinery of becoming, so that it could be seen and stopped. He saw now that heaven and hell were both fabricated, both dependent, both impermanent. Only the unconditioned stood outside the endless churn. The next day, Sāriya sought out the elder again. "If Nibbāna is beyond thought," he asked, "then why do we speak of it?" The monk smiled, folding his hands in his lap. "To point, not to define. Like a finger pointing at the moon. You don't hold on to the finger. You look where it points." "And the moon?" Sāriya asked. "You cannot possess it. But you can stop mistaking the reflections in the river for the real thing." Sāriya bowed deeply. For the first time, he understood that words were not meant to carry truth. They were meant to unload it. The teachings were not maps to a place, but invitations to drop the burden of needing to go anywhere. In the silence between questions, a new clarity emerged, not intellectual, but felt. Nibbāna was not the destination. It was the end of destinations. The rains had come. Sāriya remained in Jetavana, helping to sweep the monastery paths, fetch water for elder monks, and listen quietly under thatched roofs as Dhamma was expounded. Days passed, then weeks. The rhythm of simplicity began to melt the fever of his seeking. One early dawn, after the morning meal, he heard that the Buddha himself would speak that day on Gajaka, the vulture's peak. The news spread like cool wind on a hot day. Hundreds of monks prepared to travel. Sāriya walked alongside a group of bhikkhus who recited verses quietly as they walked barefoot across the hills of Rajagaha. The terrain was rocky, the sun sharp, but no one complained. For those who had once burned with craving, the austerity was peace. At Gajaka, the Buddha stood on a natural stone platform. He did not wear jewels, nor wave his hands like the priests. He simply looked out upon the monks and said, "Sabadita. All is burning." The words struck like thunder in a clear sky. The eye is burning. Forms are burning. Eye consciousness is burning. Burning with what? Burning with the fire of lust, the fire of hatred, the fire of delusion. Burning with birth, aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Sāriya had never heard truth spoken so nakedly. The Buddha's voice was calm, not theatrical. His eyes did not plead for followers. He simply described what is. The ear is burning. The nose is burning. The tongue is burning. The body is burning. The mind is burning. As the sermon unfolded, a strange thing happened. Sāriya felt as though his body were being read aloud. Not his biography, but his truth, that for years he had lived in a fire he could not name. The fire of wanting. The fire of resisting. The fire of becoming. He remembered, suddenly and sharply, his youth, the hunger for praise, the fear of death, the need to be someone. He had been a bundle of fires, thinking that if he burned brightly enough, he would become enlightened. But the Buddha offered no fire to feed, only a path to quenching. Seeing this, the Buddha said, "The noble disciple becomes disenchanted. Disenchanted, he becomes dispassionate. Through dispassion, he is liberated. And in that liberation, he knows. Birth is ended. The holy life is lived. What had to be done is done. There is no more coming into any state of being." Sāriya sat motionless as the mountain breeze brushed his face. His eyes stung, not from sorrow, but from the sudden lifting of weight he had never known he carried. After the sermon, monks dispersed quietly. Some went to meditate in nearby caves. Others sat beneath neem trees in silence. Sāriya remained. He stared at his own hand, noticing how he had always called it mine. How the moment of form arose, his mind reached to grasp or judge it. How every perception became fuel. It's not the senses, he whispered to himself, but how I relate to them. That is the fire. He remembered a verse from another sutta. Craving is the seamstress, the Buddha once said, who sews one existence to another. And suddenly, Sāriya saw it. Craving was not just wanting things, it was the hidden assumption that something was missing, that the next moment would fulfill, that becoming someone else would complete him. That assumption was the flame. Nibbāna was the non-feeding of it. He didn't need to destroy the world. He only needed to stop feeding fire to it with clinging. He walked back down the mountain slowly, pausing now and then to simply watch a bee land on a flower, or the way the wind moved a thread of grass. Everything was still happening, but his hunger to own or alter it had quieted. He remembered a line from another elder monk. The fire wants fuel. If you stop throwing in logs, it goes out, not with a bang, but with peace. That was Nibbāna. Not escape, not eternal pleasure, but the gentle ending of fire. Sāriya continued to dwell in the monastery at Jetavana, no longer out of ambition, but from something gentler, a quiet yearning not to acquire truth, but to let go into it. Yet even within the stillness, old habits lingered like smoke in a burned house. One afternoon, while sweeping fallen jackfruit leaves near a kuti, he overheard a heated discussion among a group of novice monks. But if the world is eternal, one said, then liberation must also be eternal. No, no, another insisted. The Buddha never said it is eternal or not. That's what makes it mysterious. But then, after death, is there something or nothing? Is the liberated one still conscious? Or does he cease entirely? Sāriya paused. He had once been those voices, pulling truth apart like threads, hoping to weave certainty from speculation. He approached and asked gently, "Have any of you ever been stabbed with a poisoned arrow?" They looked at him, puzzled. "No, of course not." "And if you were," he continued, "would you demand to know the name of the man who shot it, the caste he was born into, the village he came from, before letting the healer remove it?" The monks blinked. "What matters more?" Sāriya asked. "The metaphysics of the arrow, or removing it before the poison spreads?" There was silence. That evening, he sought out the elder monk again. The moon was rising, round and pale, casting long shadows between the sala trees. "Venerable Sir," Sāriya said, "why does the Buddha not answer such questions? Is the world eternal? Is the soul reborn? Is the arahant still conscious after death?" The monk smiled, as though he had been waiting for this. "Because none of those questions remove the arrow. But they feel important," Sāriya said. "I used to think liberation required knowing what lies beyond death. That," the elder said, "is like trying to learn the stars while your house is on fire." He picked up a stick and traced a circle in the dirt. "Suffering is here," he said, pointing inside the circle. "Craving is here. Birth, decay, sorrow, illusion, all here." He drew an arrow pointing out of the circle. "But the questions you ask, they point outward, away from the wound. They never touch the heat where suffering burns." So the Buddha remained silent? Not from ignorance, but from compassion, because what matters is what frees the heart. Sāriya reflected on this for a long time. He remembered how many debates he had heard about the soul, the gods, the beginning of time, all the polished arguments and circular logic, and not once had any of them brought peace. The next day, Sāriya sat in meditation beneath a lone neem tree, recalling the Buddha's actual words in the Kamlukya Sutta. It is as if a man were struck by a poisoned arrow, and his friends and family bring a surgeon. But he says, "I will not have this arrow removed until I know who shot it, what kind of bow he used, what wood the arrow was made of." He saw now that speculation was a defense, a distraction his mind used to avoid looking directly at its own fire. Asking what happens after death was easier than asking what was happening right now in the body, in the breath, in the mind. "I've spent years chasing explanations," he whispered to himself. "And not once did I ask, what is suffering doing to me right now?" He brought his attention inward. He observed how the breath shortened with desire, how the mind flinched from pain, how even thoughts about truth could become a veil. That evening, he returned to the elder monk. "I think I see now," he said. "We ask what Nibbana is because we're still afraid." Afraid of what? Of not being, of not continuing, of not becoming something more. The elder nodded slowly. "And in that fear, we invent stories. Some call it heaven, some call it annihilation. But they are both fabrications stitched by the mind to defend itself. Then what is real? Sāriya asked. The elder leaned close. What is real is this. Suffering exists. And so does its end. The rest is smoke. That night, Sāriya sat long into the dark. He no longer needed to decide if Nibbana was eternal or not, if it existed somewhere or happened after. All that mattered was this. When clinging ceased, suffering ended. And when suffering ended, there was peace, unconditioned, wordless, and undeniable. A dry wind swept across the monastic grounds. The sky was dust-colored, and the mango leaves rattled with a sound like whispering ropes. News had come that a well-loved elder monk, Venerable Nibbāna, known for his gentle smile, was on his deathbed. Sāriya, along with others, was invited to pay respects. The elder lay on a straw mat in a simple kuti, surrounded by a few disciples. His skin had shrunk tight over his bones, but his face bore a peace that unsettled Sāriya more than sorrow ever could. As the disciples adjusted his robe and wiped his brow, Nibbāna opened his eyes and smiled faintly. No fire now, he whispered. A younger monk leaned in. Venerable, is there anything we should remember from your journey? The old monk's voice was thin, yet clear. I have tasted the waters of becoming. Sweet and bitter, endless and empty. I have followed the path of clinging, and I have seen it always leads to the same door. But now, there is no thirst. He closed his eyes for a while. Let the world be the world, he said softly. It is always changing, but this mind no longer chases it. He died not long after. No outcry, no visions, only a breath that came and went. Like a bird leaving an open window, Sāriya remained at the threshold long after the others had left. He watched how the body that had once taught Dhamma, once walked alms rounds, once smiled at novices, was now silent, unmoving, claimed by no one. He did not feel horror. He felt something deeper, a thinning of illusion. He recalled the Buddha's words in the Dhammapada. Taya jaiti soko, taya jaiti bhaya. From craving arises sorrow. From craving arises fear. And he saw it, not as poetry, but as fact. Every fear he had ever known had been born from craving. The craving to live, to matter, to be remembered. The thirst to become, or to avoid becoming. The hunger for permanence in a world that never paused. That evening, he sat alone beneath a Bodhi tree. The leaves flickered like flame tips in the wind. For the first time, he began to feel what it meant to stop thirsting. Not out of suppression, not by force, but by understanding the futility of it. He remembered the Buddha's teaching on the origin of suffering. Yata panabhavika nandaragasahata, tatra tatra abhinandini. There is this craving which leads to renewed existence, accompanied by delight and lust, delighting here and there. Sāriya had always thought craving was just wanting pleasures, food, praise, possessions. But now he saw its subtler forms, the craving for identity, for meaning, for resolution. Even the desire to understand Nibbana had been a form of craving, abhijita, the lust for insight. He noticed now how the mind grasped at every moment, labeling, resisting, comparing. Can I see without grasping? He asked himself. Can I live without thirst? He did not answer with words. He answered with watching. A fly landed on his knee. He felt the sensation cool, soft, momentary. The mind did not react. No aversion, no irritation, just sensation and cessation. A breath entered his lungs. The chest rose, then fell. No clinging to the in-breath, no resisting the out. A sound in the distance, children laughing, a dog barking, a gate creaking. All part of the world, arising and vanishing like clouds across water. In that moment, nothing was missing. Not because he had added anything, but because the thirst to add was not there. That was peace, not a mystical experience, not a divine light. Just the mind no longer pushing against the river of experience, no longer dipping buckets into it hoping to drink satisfaction. He remembered a phrase the Buddha once used to describe the arahant. Hido bhikkhu napabadi. The monk stands firm. He flows not. That night, Sāriya did not sleep. He sat in silence, awake not from effort, but from stillness. He saw how becoming was an endless wheel, not a punishment, but a pattern. He saw how craving was the axis, and how letting go was not defeat, but release. When dawn finally stretched its golden fingers through the forest, he smiled, not because he had achieved something, but because he no longer needed to achieve. He rose and joined the other monks for alms, walking barefoot through the village. The rice placed in his bowl was warm and simple. The The children bowed with joy. Dogs barked. Flies buzzed. Life pulsed, vibrant and impermanent. But inside, there was no thirst. The hot season began to fade. The scent of tamarind flowers drifted through Jetavana. The rains were over, the days lengthening. Sāriya sat on the bank of a small pond, watching the water ripple beneath the breeze. He had been quiet for weeks now, not with the silence of suppression, but the silence of someone who no longer sought to answer questions that didn't matter. He was remembering a phrase he had once skipped over in his studies. Bhavanaroto Nibbāna. The cessation of becoming is Nibbāna. It had puzzled him once. Why not the cessation of suffering? Or the cessation of desire? Why becoming? But now, the answer felt like a pool he had just learned to enter. For most of his life, he realized, he had been obsessed with becoming something. As a youth, he wanted to become wise, then enlightened, then known, then respected. Even in renunciation, he had chased identity. He had simply traded one kind of becoming for another. I wanted to become someone who had let go of becoming. He laughed aloud at the irony. A squirrel darted through the brush, startled. Sāriya bowed his head in apology to it. Becoming was subtle. It was not only the desire to be reborn, but the constant psychological movement of constructing a self again and again. A memory from childhood, being praised by his mother for reciting verses. He had clung to the feelings, built an identity out of it. I am smart. I am good. I am better than others. That was becoming. A memory from his early monkhood, comparing his meditation to others. Secretly proud of his discipline. Again, becoming. A moment even now, just yesterday, imagining that he was closer to Nibbāna than others. The mind reaching, building, grasping. This, he thought, is how Sastra continues, not in realms, but in moments. He remembered the Buddha's words in the Anatta Sutta. If it were truly mine, it would not lead to affliction. Becoming led to affliction. Every time he built a self, he had to defend it. Every identity needed to be fed. Every image he clung to required maintenance. And thus, suffering was born, not from the world, but from the very act of constructing someone to experience it. So what was non-becoming? Not annihilation, not death, but not adding, not performing the mental act of weaving I am into every moment. He noticed it that day, sitting by the pond. A dragonfly buzzed past, and the mind didn't move to own the moment. No thought of how peaceful I feel. No comparing it to other days. Just seeing. Just being. No narrative. No becoming. He remembered something profound the Buddha had once said to a group of monks. There is, monks, an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned. Were there not, there would be no escape from the born. Become, made, and conditioned. He had heard that before, but now it struck like a bell ringing in a canyon. That which is unborn is not a place. It is the non-construction of anything. That which is unbecome is not somewhere you go. It is no longer turning anything into I or mine. In that moment, he understood what the elder monk meant when he had said, "Let the world be the world." The world was sakkata, fabricated, formed. It would always change, always rise and fall. It wasn't a prison. It was a process. What imprisoned him was the desire to make that process mean something about me. Sāriya stood slowly. His legs ached, but he smiled. He did not feel enlightened. He felt empty of hunger. And that was enough. He began to walk back to the monastery. On the path, he passed a man carrying a heavy load of firewood. The man groaned, sweat pouring down his back. Sāriya bowed gently and said, "You carry much, friend." The man looked at him, surprised. "Yes, venerable. But this is the way of life. We all carry something." Sāriya nodded. "True. Until we see that we don't have to." The man laughed, not understanding. But Sāriya didn't mind. Not everything needed to be understood. Some truths had to be laid down, not explained. He remembered the Buddha's own words near the end of his life. Vyusata brahmacharya, katakaraya, naparam ithateya. The holy life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. There is no more of this becoming. No more athata, thisness, identity, becoming. Sāriya sat in his kuti that night, candle flickering low. He did not yearn to be an arahant. He did not long to reach a new state. He only watched the breath rise and fall, letting each moment be just what it was. Nothing to become, nothing to defend. And in that space, something quiet bloomed. Not an experience, not a vision, just a depth of peace that didn't need his name to rest in. The hot winds softened. The sal trees began to bloom with white flowers. scattered like stars across the monastery paths. Sāriya sat on a stone bench beneath one of them, the same tree where he had once, long ago, asked what mindfulness really meant. The path since then had unfolded in quiet revolutions, layer by layer, illusion falling away not in dramatic bursts, but in soft, irreversible recognitions. And now, there was only one illusion left. The last shadow on the wall. What is Nibbāna? He had meditated for years. Let go of possessions. Let go of ideas. Let go even of the need to become anything. And yet, somewhere in the deepest folds of his mind, he realized he had still been imagining Nibbāna as something. A state, a place, a realm beyond the veil, a reward for renunciation, a holy treasure waiting behind the final door. But that morning, during walking meditation, the illusion collapsed. Not with pain, not with joy, but with clarity. He had been watching his steps. Heel, arch, toe, the feeling of earth, the shifting weight. One moment, one breath, then another, and in the space between steps, a thought had passed through like a drifting cloud. If this is all there is, then where is Nibbāna? It wasn't doubt. It wasn't despair. It was a question asked not by the intellect, but by the heart, weary of seeking. And then, like water quietly soaking into dry soil, the answer came not in words, but in absence. There was nothing more, and nothing missing. Nibbāna had never been somewhere else. It was not a place to go. It was the end of going. It was not a state to enter. It was the end of entering. It was not a self-realized. It was the end of the idea of self. He stopped walking and stood still, breath quiet. Not clinging to anything, not even to the peace he felt. It was like standing at the edge of a great ocean and realizing it was not separate from the sky. No borders, no edges, just no construction, no desire to name the moment, no resistance, no becoming. And that was Nibbāna, not fire extinguished, but the end of lighting fires, not silence after sound, but the end of the urge to speak, not peace achieved, but peace revealed once the building stopped. He remembered a teaching from the Uddhana. There is, monks, that base where there is no earth, no water, no fire, no air. No coming, no going, no standing still, not this world, not another world. For years, he had tried to imagine what that could mean. Now, he understood, it was the unfabricated, that which the mind cannot point to, because pointing is already a fabrication. That which cannot be experienced, because experience still implies someone experiencing. But it could be realized, not as a thing, but as the ending of all thing-making. That evening, he visited the elder monk, the one who had once told him, "Let the world be the world." Sāriya bowed and said, "Venerable sir, I now understand. Nibbāna is not a place." The elder smiled, not surprised. "Then what is it?" Sāriya paused, then replied, "It is the ending of the fire, the dropping of the torch. The mind no longer compelled to build anything, no longer driven to resist or become. And who realizes it?" Sāriya answered without hesitation, "No one. When realization happens, there is no one left to hold it." The elder leaned forward and touched his shoulder gently. "Then your journey is no longer a path, but a resting." "There's nothing left to find," Sāriya said softly, "because there's nothing that was ever missing. And that," the elders said, "is the final freedom." The next day, Sāriya returned to his usual spot under the Bodhi tree. He closed his eyes, not to escape, not to dive into concentration, not to search, just to be with what was and nothing more. He noticed thoughts arise, memories, sounds, faint sensations. But they were no longer sticky. They didn't pull. They didn't claim him. They were like echoes in a canyon after the speaker had walked away. He breathed. The breath came. The breath went. No one breathed it. No one held it. It just was. In that space, there was nothing to do. No goal. No attainment. Not even the idea of letting go, because the one who lets go had long since vanished. There was only suchness to Tathāta, the unadorned truth of things. No subject. No object. No arrival. Just the end. But not the end as in destruction. The end as in completion. The end as in freedom. That night, the wind returned to the trees. Clouds swept across the sky. Somewhere in the dark, a jackal howled. The world spun on unbothered, unbound. And Sāriya sat in stillness, eyes closed, heart silent, not claiming the moment. Not holding it, only knowing. Nibbāna is not a place. It is what remains when nothing else is built. Morning came quietly. A thin mist lingered above the earth, and dew clung to the grass like silver threads. In the kitchen hut, novices were already stirring rice, clinking pots, and laughing softly. Sāriya woke before the bell. He washed his face in the cold basin water, tied his robe, and stepped outside. A dog followed him for a while, tail wagging. He offered it a smile. He felt no urgency, no purpose to fulfill, no mission, just a natural rhythm. Wake, walk, eat, teach, meditate. But not as part of a plan, not anymore. He was no longer becoming. He was simply being free from becoming, free from resistance. Years ago, such simplicity would have terrified him. Is this all? He would have thought. But now it felt vast, like space, unmeasured, unrestricted, peaceful in its very openness. He stepped barefoot onto the path into the village. Along the way, he passed a farmer who bowed deeply. "Venerable, may I ask something?" Sāriya paused. "Yes, friend. My son died last week. Fever took him. He was only 6. His voice cracked. People say I should be strong. But how can I stop feeling this pain?" Sāriya sat down on the edge of the road, motioning for the man to join him. They both sat in the dust, under the morning sky. He didn't offer consolation. He didn't give a teaching right away. He simply looked into the man's eyes and said, "Grief is love." Confused by change, the man wiped his face. "I miss him so much. I still hear his voice at night." Sāriya nodded. Even the Buddha wept when a close disciple passed. But he also saw the truth. What arises must cease. Nothing owned, nothing kept, not even a child's smile. "Then what am I supposed to do?" the man asked. "Grieve fully. Then let the river move. Don't build a dam in the heart. Let love flow on, not as ownership, but as kindness for all beings still caught in birth and death." The man was silent. Then he touched his chest. "This eases something." Sāriya smiled. "Good." He stood, bowed gently, and continued walking. At the village, people filled his bowl with rice, lentils, curry. He smiled at the children, nodded to the elders, accepted their offerings without clinging, without pride. He had learned how to receive without self. As he walked back, he felt the breeze against his skin. He felt the warmth of the rising sun. Each sensation arrived, then passed. There was no need to hold them. Back at Nibbāna, he shared his food with a sick monk and sat with him in silence while he ate. No teachings were spoken, just presence. Later, a novice approached him. "Manny, may I ask, what is the taste of Nibbāna?" Sāriya looked at him, like the end of thirst. "Is it bliss?" "Not in the way the world seeks bliss. It is the absence of seeking itself, like the silence after a drum stops beating." The boy pondered this, eyes wide. "Can I find it too?" Sāriya said. "If you stop looking for it and see what is here, clearly, moment by moment, you will begin to taste freedom." That afternoon, he sat beneath the Bodhi tree again. Leaves fluttered, birds chirped, clouds moved. He thought of all the identities he had worn: child, student, monk, seeker. They had served their purpose, but now they were shed like old robes. Nothing left to uphold. He thought of the Buddha's final words: "All fabrications are subject to vanishing. Strive diligently." And he understood that striving had never meant chasing. It meant watching the mind's tendencies with such clarity that they had nowhere left to hide. He was no longer a man practicing to reach a goal. He was a flame that had ceased feeding, not extinguished in death, but extinguished in clinging, in thirst, in becoming. This was what the ancient words meant: the fire has gone out, not destroyed, not erased, just nothing left to burn. That night, the moon was high, the sky cloudless. Silence held the monastery like a bowl. Sāriya sat alone, no different from any other monk, yet no longer bound by the chain of identity. He could teach, or not teach, stay, or go, live, or die. It would make no difference to what he truly was, which, in truth, was nothing at all, but not in a void-like sense. Rather, in the most open sense, like a mirror that reflects all, but holds nothing, like space that allows all movement, but clings to no shape. There was no more birth in him, no more becoming, no more fire, just peace. A peace uncaused, unclaimed, unmoved. He whispered to the night, "This is the ending," and it was always here. The Bodhi leaves rustled. A dog barked once in the distance, and the world, ever changing, moved gently on, its dance untroubled, its rhythms unchanged. But Sāriya was no longer a dancer. He had stepped off the stage and smiled quietly in the wings.